All right, you beautiful humans, get those dislike buttons ready and definitely smash it more than once because we have got to have a chat about what's happening at Apple's WWDC this year, including the tough pill to swallow about what we're likely not going to be seeing at this event. And I do want to make it clear here that for those of you that are interested in listening to me read off of a leaked spec sheet or some rumor about Apple's M2, I'd really like to skip over that because you're just too smart for that. And I mean, I know that there are plenty of tests that are happening on the M2. I know the tests are happening. I'd put all of my Apple shares on that one. Of course, they're not going to be worth much right now because they're getting beat down. But as far as releasing it at WWDC, even announcing it, this is where I think that we as voices on this platform on YouTube are doing you a disservice, potentially influencing your buying decisions. You're looking to make them, and especially if this is a buying decision that needs to happen yesterday. And of course, if you're still waiting because of what we're saying, I mean, that's really giving us a lot of credit here, but let's just say maybe. I know that for some of you, the M1 is really getting long in the tooth, and I'd somewhat agree with you here on the nomenclature, but as far as the performance, that's where our eyes may veer away from each other because Apple as a company is going to be fine. Apple, on the other hand, has reported quarterly reports that to most didn't even seem possible quarter after quarter. And this isn't the first time that Tim has tried to allude to a little caution on the next quarterly reporting on the stock because it just continues to get beat up all the time and it eventually does recover. But I think that we need to understand that as much as we'd like to be immune, Apple is very much going to be losing some of those gains, especially now as they continue to diversify. But the hardware is the eye candy. I know. And this has been painful for many of you that have been waiting months on your M1 Pro, your Max, your Ultra devices. And here we are talking about the M2 as if they have these like ready to hit the shelves before you'd even get to like what you ordered months ago. And again, I know we talked about testing and I know they have these ready. But the only thing is that I'm standing here just being a shareholder for as long as I've been and like a consumer of Apple products and my own experience in business and especially dealing with the supply chain issues of my own. And that is it. That is what I'm standing on. But I'll throw you a bone when it comes to hardware, as most of us know that the updates to like the Mac Pro were to some degree, they of course were teased out and supposed to be in the future.
With just one more product to go, Mac Pro.
And of course, the assumption is that it's the not so distant future. And I can see this as a possible announcement at WWDC because it's a developers conference where Apple does need to keep hammering away at their grab for more market share through these software efficiencies. Because at the end of the day, the consensus is that, yeah, the hardware's fun and we love the spec. And that's what we're interested in. However, I think it's extremely short-sighted to think about it that way because the spec doesn't matter if the software doesn't work. And the Mac Pro is also such a small target market in Apple's hardware division. And even though we would still see some existence of some level of delay in getting these on the shelves, I still think that Apple would have at least an easier time managing these, especially over their MacBook lines. But we could also see this more as an announcement and maybe just getting into the hands of some of the developers outside of their own R&D channels, but likely not an official launch at the event. And I do still think that some of the easing won't occur for the next 18 to 24 months as TSMC is building out they're like developing in Singapore and then of course even in the United States, but that's gonna take a while to bring that up to speed and bring that to scale. And yeah, it is no surprise that the iPhone, especially the iPhone, but also the Mac hardware, these are the biggest chunks of revenue for Apple. But having just under $20 billion this last quarter with their services, this vertical is continuing to grow. And you've got businesses like Costco that are getting on board to try to sell some of these lines. And whether we're going to see more of an a la carte or subscription model for some of Apple's additional software, especially their Pro apps, which we might be upset about, but this is where it's much easier to scale because you've got more than capable hardware right now and a very predictable revenue stream. But we also know that this is where at least a shortage and another dependency on outsourcing development is happening with the state of what's happening in the world and Apple's own struggle to even attract teams back into the office. So even if and when these shortages are addressed, it still becomes a continued race to secure that ecosystem. And then of course, getting users cozied back up in the ecosystem with software being such a major factor, because as I said earlier, the specs are fun, but then it just becomes a battle of egos as everyone's comparing their shoe size to the other. However, it doesn't matter unless those specs are getting the work done and able to utilize everything effectively. And honestly, I think we should just demand more from Apple software and of course those brands and their partners and the development teams to make the experience better for us. And I can imagine the M2 is going to be even more efficient and fun to test, but the reason should be shrinking on why we can't squeeze more out of the hardware that we already have right now. Even if the expectation that the iPad Pro is to remain on iPad OS and not a full desktop class operating system, it can still be better than what we have now. I use the iPad Pro quite often. I love it, but it's still the sports car that I'm driving around the block and the occasional trip to the store. And I accept the personal responsibility that I should be buying the hardware for what it can do and not what I think it should do. And that is on me. And so with the M2, it's just funny because the Mac Mini was the entry point outside of an iPhone as the gateway as far as into a full operating system. And I still think that this next drop is coming. But as I've said before, I used to recommend a Chromebook like over the old MacBook Airs because that's about all that they were good for anyway. But I know that this previous thought is now quickly evolving for more obvious reasons because what we have now, what we're able to do now on these chips. And again, I just think that we should just be just as excited and demand more when it comes to development because I'm sure your lives do not exist in a synthetic benchmark. And I do think that the M2 getting announced at the event would really create a cascade of events of canceling orders that many of you are still waiting on. And by some long shot, that there would be at least enough inventory initially for us to purchase them blindly, run some workflows and scenarios for you here on the platform. And then of course, you're comparing all of this information, pulling in data, still waiting, because now those of you that are like that were waiting before, pulling in the data on the M2, then this just creates continued delay and you're probably kicking yourself because you canceled your original order for a machine that pretty much would have served your needs. And so I do not think that Apple is going to do that to themselves. That is pretty much my prediction. But of course, be sure to bookmark this video so that you can circle back around, tell me how wrong that I was on this prediction. You go out there and rock those faces. I have got more tests to run on these current machines. Well, I mean, not this machine. This is a classic right here. But I will catch you right back here on the next one. I didn't even talk about the M1 Pro going in the Mac Mini. I know people are still looking for that upgrade on the Mac Mini as far like even just the M1 Pro. Like what if we just, I mean, seriously, enough of this mess. Just demand better software, better utilization.